Welcome back to this part of the Gen AI workshop, which is all about prompt engineering. So prompt engineering, I think, as I said at the very start, it's just a fancy way of describing the ways in which you give AI tools your prompt, your question or your task or whatever it is that you put into the box that is prompt. And prompt engineering is how you utilize skills and techniques to get the best output possible. Now, let me just start this by saying that prompt engineering is in some ways an art form, and it's newly developed in the sense that it there are some fundamental principles which I'll teach you today, which you can use to ensure that you're crafting the best prompts possible. But there's some things that I'm teaching you that I've just learned through using AI a lot. And there's also more things that will likely come out. And so the best way to first get in touch with using AI and knowing how to prompt effectively is just to have a go and start prompting and interacting with the models and understanding that trying different techniques that you're about to learn and seeing in what ways does that improve the overall output. And so we'll cover a lot of this in more detail, but I think one message I want to put at the front of this section of the course is that there's no perfect way to craft a prompt. And in some ways, if it's easy to just have a go and say what you need to say to get something, that's fine. It's likely that you may achieve still a good output. It just may require some iterative processes or going back and forward, whereas using some of these prompting techniques gives you the better output in a shorter amount of time. So there's no perfect way. These are just tools and techniques to help you on that journey. And what's interesting is that as these models are developing, they're actually trying to reduce the amount of prompt engineering required by the user to ensure that it's more high quality output process overall, regardless of the input. What I've noticed despite this change is that these techniques still have utility and use in terms of providing better quality outputs in a shorter amount of time, particularly for the task that's needed. So I think really, really effective to keep in mind as time changes. This is still a useful area to understand more how the models work and receive information as well. So it really comes back to the mechanisms of how it works. So it's at its fundamental, it's the art of asking the right questions to get the best output from LLMs. And I use the word art there intentionally because it really is this art form and creative process with some structure that I can help you along with. So how the whole process works is you have a prompt, something you put into the text box of the LLM, it's processed by the model, and you get a completion, which is the output. So what are some prompting best practices? Well, I think a lot of the prompting best practices relate to the best practices when it comes to communication to others, and also science communication if you're in research as well. So some of the principles are really the same in terms of clarity of instruction. So clearly communicate what content or information is most important and have that at the forefront. Structuring the prompt, so starting by defining its role, giving context, input data, then providing the instruction, and we'll go through this in a moment. Use specific varied examples to help the model narrow its focus and generate more accurate results. This is probably the number one takeaway from this section is if you can give it an example of what you want the output to be like, you are more likely to get an output that is what you desire. What I often find in people who struggle with this process of prompt engineering is they're working with the AI and they're hypercritical and say, this is not good, this is not what I wanted. And then I'll ask the question, so could you describe to me what it is that you want? What is the output look like? And they'll have some idea, but won't have a clear articulation. And that's fine. Sometimes you're learning with the AI and you're developing your understanding with it in terms of what the output should be. But if you do have a clear understanding of what that output is, then putting that either clearly through the instructions for the AI or through an example that you can map the AI to by providing, hey, this is an example written piece that is the structure and flow and formatting that I'd like you to follow in this new context. I think that is where you'll get the best bang for your buck. and for the limited amount of effort put into that. And use constraints to limit the scope of the model's output. So this can help avoid meandering away from instructions into factual inaccuracies. So making sure that you're constraining the scope of the output. And also keeping in mind the context window that we learned within the How AI Works section is that if you're having a new task, have a new conversation window, and if you're having a conversation for a very, very long time, you may notice that if you've used up a lot of your context window, you're likely going to have some forgetting of what was said initially, or some of the commands or restrictions and guardrails put in place and requirements, and so they may blur and provide you with less quality as a function of that. So try to summarize and start with a new conversation. So another key thing is to break down complex tasks into a sequence of simpler prompts. I think I see this a lot where people tell AI to do something really complex, but give it a very simple prompt. Unlike what I asked it to do, to write a lecture on survey research and design, it would have been better if I gave it a more structured prompt to say exactly what I wanted from that first lecture. It still did an okay job in terms of providing some content, but if you think of a complex task and you were to break it down into simpler components, that's really where you can utilize AI effectively if you're working on a small part of a larger task. If you give it too much to do, more often than not, unless you have an example for it to look at, it's likely going to have many blanks to fill in terms of the requirements. And so that's something that unless you can ask it some questions, and here's a tip that you can do is you can say, ask me questions before you proceed if you have any questions. And that's actually an opportunity for the AI to ask you some questions you may not have had in your prompt and say, hey, did you think of this? How would you like me to respond to this, and whatnot? Number 6 is instruct the model to evaluate or check its own responses before producing them. So make sure to limit your response to 3 sentences, rate your work on a scale of 1 to 10 for conciseness. Do you think this is correct? Or even just double check your work. And that's a common prompt that people use to have AI just have a look over what is provided. And be creative. The more creative and open-minded you are, the better your results will be. LLMs and prompt engineering are still in their infancy. I think I was trying to hammer home that point early. So it's evolving every day. These are just frameworks you can use, but don't use it as the be-all, end-all. It's just a stepping stone in your ability to prompt effectively. So what are the basics of prompt engineering? And again, these are some useful resources that are hyperlinked in red, so you can click on the title and find those in more detail. But really, the fewer assumptions AI makes means the less likely it is to hallucinate. And that's where we were talking about the misalignment problem, or the alignment problem, and how you can mitigate that with prompting. So if you're asking it to complete a really large, complex task, and your prompt doesn't really match what's required for that, with the understanding of that, then it's going to have a lot of assumptions and likely some hallucinations. So you can either break that down and give it that, or give it the prompt, or you can put a lot more time and effort into your prompt to craft a much larger piece of work. In my experience, breaking it down is usually always a better strategy in terms of getting better output, but maybe I don't prompt well enough for that larger output piece. And so it's really a balance of what you need that output to be like. Providing examples, when I've had success with the larger pieces of work and output, it's largely been because I've provided multiple examples of what the output should be like, and provided very specific prompts as to, I wanted to have this sort of section from this piece, and then have this sort of components from this piece, and I gave it really specific guardrails in terms of what it needs to be doing. And so that helps a lot with examples. It can be an absolute game changer. I use the conversational interface on many generative AI tools to refine its outputs. Just have a chat with it. Don't overcomplicate it. And I think a really nice way into that is just using voice mode on any AI tool and just having a chat with that. That can be usually effective. Specificity is key. The model will always make an assumption on any point you don't clearly explain. And so it's continuous trial and error. And if you switch topics, start a new chat, or it may get confused, which we've covered, and we've covered why that's the case with the context window. Encourage AI to think step by step. So you can say, think step by step as you're working through this. And a good prompt has 4 key elements. So these are the ones I briefly mentioned before. This is the role, task, requirements, and instructions. So What does this work as? And you may have seen elements of this in some of the examples I've provided. So a role is where prompting starts with act as or pretend to be, and that will provide responses similar to the role you provide. So it could be pretend that you're an expert science communicator, or pretend you're an expert researcher. This can give it a context as to how it should be thinking. Setting a specific role for a given prompt increases the likelihood of more accurate information when done appropriately. So for example, act as an expert in the field of computer science, determines the type of information and the way in which information is communicated to you. And this also determines the interactivity of the conversation. The task, and I would also say with the role, probably the least effortful, most valuable output you can get. So least effortful in the sense of it's just the first line of your prompt to say, imagine you're an expert, da, 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 and then give your normal prompt. That is enough to increase the quality of the output that you receive. The task is a summary of what you want the prompt to do. So there's a lot of creativity which comes with writing a task. It can range from generating birthday gift ideas to doing game show questions with the content from your last lecture. You want to outline what you want the AI to do. So you want to be specific with the task objective, and as unclear objectives lead to worse outputs. You've probably caught on to the fact that the less you specify, the more room there is for AI to provide you what you don't want, which is the alignment problem. The requirements is writing clear requirements is all about giving as much information as possible to ensure your response doesn't use any incorrect assumptions. AI models make assumptions for any information they don't have in the prompt. It's important to define what an output should look like and the conditions that affect the output. This includes the various conditions to limit the assumptions made by the model. In a nutshell, you want to be specific, give it as much detail as possible, and try to imagine in your head what that output should look like, and then provide that description to the AI. If you don't know, that's fine, but recognize that that will likely result in a more back and forth nature collaborative work with the AI rather than a directive, this is what I want and this is how you need to get there. And then the instructions will inform how the AI will complete the task. So instructions can include examples of how it's supposed to work and steps it can follow or any information. So how should it go about completing the task, examples of how it could go about the tasks, and feedback on steps it's taken will improve this even further. So constantly give it feedback on its work so it knows what you want and how you want it to speak in certain ways. Here's an example of one. So I'm in research. I often engage in science communication. I think it's a really important part. You probably figure this out by the fact that I have a podcast, and I think it's just really important that research isn't confined within scholarly literature and academia, that it's actually translated to the public and policy for impact, and so people can do something with the information available. And so often at times this means that every time I do a research paper, I work with the media teams to ensure that it's connected to media such as ABC, as you saw as an example, as a recent one, so that people can understand what the findings mean and improve their lives as a consequence. So often I'm asked to write a piece for the public, which to help them or even speak about a piece of the public on radios or TV to get a sense of dementia and brain health and what they need to know for different populations, what say women need to know, and elderly or young people, because there's different nuances in midlife and late life messages that have slight nuances with the science as a function of that. And so I can use AI for a task like this, where I give it requirements. I say, hey, here's the audience that I'm speaking to, and that audience could be the general public, or it could be maybe I'm going to a school, maybe I'm going to a library. There's many different areas. What's the tone? I want it friendly, informative, encouraging. What's the format? Maybe it's a blog post, so that's what I've put here. And citations, mention credible sources briefly, such as university research studies or peer-reviewed journals. What are my instructions? How do I want the blog post to be written? We'll start with a hook to engage readers. avoid jargon and explain scientific terms in simple language, structure the post with subheadings for easier reading, focus on key findings and their implications, include 3 practical research-based lifestyle tips that can support brain health, and end with an encouraging message about how small changes can impact positively brain health over time. And so that's the role, task, requirements, and instructions. So the role part of this was to act as a science communication expert for university's outreach program, specializing in specifying complex research on genetics, aging, brain health for the general public. Write a 500-word blog post is the task on recent findings on how genetics and lifestyle factors influence brain health. The goal is to explain science concepts in an accessible way and offer practical advice readers can apply to support their brain health. So this is an example of how it can be used with role, task, requirements, and instructions. Now, you may be thinking, how clever of Anandin to have created this whole role, task, requirements, and instructions for this prompt. But really, I just asked AI to create a prompt for me regarding a blog post using role, task, requirements, and instructions. And so it created this structure that I modified and then was able to use within here. So here is the example of what it looks like with the prompt. So this is the prompt, and a good telling feature here, which I want you to keep in mind, in the fact that it was AI generated, is that this is it uses some hashtags and asterisks. So just keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But this is a prompt that I worked on with AI, and it generated this role, task, requirements, and instructions. And here is the article, all right? So you can access it and read it in detail, but as an overview, it gives a title, Unlocking Brain Health, How Genetics and Lifestyle Shape Our Aging Mind. And the hook is, as we grow older, many of us wonder how we can keep our mind sharp and healthy. Is it all down to our genes, or do the choices we make every day have a big impact too? Recent research shows it's a bit of both, and it goes on to talk about genetics and lifestyle. So genetics, what's hardwired, what isn't. It talks about ApoE, which is a gene that is present in everybody, but depending on the alleles you have, E2, E3, E4, you may be at greater risk of Alzheimer's disease with E4 allele opposed to other alleles. And so really that's what it explains here. There's a high risk ApoE variant, and it doesn't go into too much detail, but it gives a good overview. Lifestyle factors, including eating for your brain, omega-3 fatty acids, nuts, legumes. Mediterranean diet is probably the most well-researched diet in terms of brain health, and it references a highly reputable journal, Neurology, in regards to the impact of this on brain health. It explains exercise is a useful way for multiple reasons, and staying connected and keeping learning, and small steps, big benefits. Accruing small changes over time makes a big impact. Look, on the face of it, for something that was generated within a few minutes, it's a pretty good overview of something to help someone understand more of the broad field of brain health, dementia, and what they could do, something actionable that they could do. And it was meant to be only 500 words. I gave it a limitation there as well. So there's only so much it can fit in. And it's really impressive as to what it could do in that time. So this is an example of how it's a output that I needed a bit more quality in. And so I invested the time by working with AI to create this thing in a matter of minutes, but invested the time in the prompt to provide more detail, and as a result, get better quality output here. And so what I want to emphasize there is that there's this philosophy in computing called GIGO, which is garbage in, garbage out. I think it's useful, and what it means essentially is if you feed in rubbish data, no matter how well your analysis is, you'll get rubbish output. In the same way, I think if you think about that approach for prompt engineering, if you feed in rubbish prompts, you're not going to get the great output always. You can, but it's not always the case. And so this is where prompt engineering works really well. Now, there's different types of prompts which are useful to know. You don't need to remember that it's called direct prompting or zero-shot prompting, but it is useful to know these different types of prompts and understanding the best strategies for certain activities. So I think an important tool, an important thing to be aware of as well, is the fact that the type of prompting I did for that blog article, I don't do for every single thing I do in AI. Much of the time, I'm using simple few sentence prompts. If I'm demanding more from the AI tool, that's when I put more effort into my prompts. But if it's something simple, then it's likely a very simple prompt, or even just using voice mode can be effective. Direct prompting is zero shot. This is where you just give a simple prompt to the AI model. There's no examples, just the instructions. So you can phrase the instruction as a question or give the model a role. So it's best for straightforward requests, basic explanations, or generating ideas. This is where most people are using AI in this way. So you could say, as a university instructor, explain the importance of academic integrity to first-year students. That's a direct prompt, very simple, just generating a response from that. Then the difference between these other prompting strategies are really in terms of the examples. So prompting with examples is one, few, or multi-shot. One-shot prompting shows the model one clear descriptive example of what you'd like it to imitate. So few and multi-shot prompting shows the model more examples of what you want to do. It works better than zero-shot for more complex tasks where pattern replication is wanted, or when you need the output to be structured in a specific way that is difficult to describe. So it's best for replicating styles, formats, or patterns, handling complex instructions, and creating consistent output. Fundamentally, it's when you know what the output should look like, or if you have different types of outputs and you want it to pull from different things, that can help. So summarize the journal article in 50 words, and here's an example 50-word summary. So that's a one-shot prompt example. So again, you have direct prompting, which doesn't have any examples, just a simple prompt. Then you have prompting with examples, and then there's chain of thought prompting. So this encourages the LLM, the large language model, to explain its reasoning. Combine it with few-shot prompting to get better results on more complex tasks. So it's really good for problem-solving, complex explanations, or step-by-step instructions. So this is explain the process of photosynthesis in steps, and then you give it step 1, describe how plants absorb sunlight. Step 2, explain how chlorophyll converts sunlight to energy. Step 3, describe the creation of glucose from water and carbon dioxide. Step 4, outline the oxygen release process. So this is chain of thought prompting because it's showing the logic that the model needs to have. And this is where the contentious debate as to whether AI models can reason or not comes from. People say, yes, they can reason. You can see it's providing reasoning here. But others say, no, it can't reason. And the reason they think it can't reason is because you have to show it what the reasoning looks like for it to do it effectively. And so it, in some ways, is mimicking that sort of behavior. But it's a field of debate at the moment. But in any case, if you want it to reason to get better results on complex tasks, that's where you need this breakdown of steps. So you can see how you're just providing detail in every single step. And then if you tie this with examples, it can be really powerful. Zero-shot chain of thought prompting. This takes a zero-shot prompt and adds an instruction. So let's think step by step. The LLM is able to generate a chain of thought from this instruction and usually a more accurate answer as well. So it's best for word problems, logical reasoning, tasks requiring precision. So describe the process by which neurons communicate with each other. Let's think step by step through the stages of this process. So this gives you the actual chain of thought with the LLM, and then maybe you could use that to engage in chain of thought prompting. So those are the different styles of prompts. Really, the key thing to keep in mind is, are you using examples or not? And are you providing it with justifications or providing it with the reasoning that it should follow or the structure it should follow or not? And as you move up through, so you go from direct prompting through to the more complex prompting styles, that's where you have more investment in time, more investment in effort, but you can get better results. But it's not necessary for everything, just for the complex output. So formatting your inputs correctly can help the model identify information it needs to use. And the most effective way is your inputs is using Markdown formatting. So Markdown is a lightweight markup language. Some coders called it, it's a markup language, but they called it Markdown. I think it's an example of coders try to be funny, I guess. I don't know. But it's used to add formatting elements to plain text documents. So I showed you a brief example of it with the prompt. I said, keep in mind what those asterisks and hashtags look like. So here, let me bring that in here again, just so you can have a look. So this is the hashtags and asterisks. And so when you see one hashtag, that's heading 1, 2 is heading 2, 3 is heading 3, and there's ways to bold and italicize everything. And so, and it goes on in terms of how Markdown works. If you can use it, and again, when I work with AI to develop prompts, it will give it to you in some ways with this Markdown language as well. And if you use R like I do, or RStudio, or any sort of coding language, this may be more familiar to you. So these are the slides from today, and you can see this is actually all written in R Markdown. So this is a link, so that's the way you link it. You give it these brackets, and then you put the others in other brackets. The hashtags are headings or new titles, and it goes on, right? So that's sort of the formatting of our Markdown. And so if you can use this in your prompting, it connects better with how the models work, because they're trained on large amounts of code. So it's actually native to it in terms of understanding this sort of Markdown features. Don't worry about this diagram here. It's for my lecture next week in statistics about Bayesian statistics. It's a very cool experiment, Bayesian's thought experiment about billiards tables, but you can look it up or come to my statistics lecture if you're interested. Okay. So that is Markdown. So well worth learning some, just even bolding text. If you bold text in your prompt, it can tell it what to focus on as well. So all of that can be really, really useful. So using Markdown as a cheat sheet. Excellent. So those are some tips there. Some other tips are use the latest model where possible, and this is where the equity comes in, is to do all students have access to the funds to be able to use more expensive models or not? Are we providing them with the support to be able to use these models effectively? What are the differences in terms of what the more advanced models are versus what the free versions offer? Usually there's limitations on the amounts of prompts you can provide during a day, or limitations on the memory. So these tools like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, they have a memory bank. So the more you interact with them, the more it knows about you, the more it is able to understand what you like in terms of your responses and not. And so this can be a really powerful tool. If you think of advertising, your ads are very tailored in many apps to your interests and your needs and wants. And so this is in some way based on what you search. And in the same way, when you're working with AI, the more you use it, the more it's tailored to you as a person. And so using the latest model is important, but also this memory bank has limitations where if you have the paid version, you get a higher amount of memory bank than others. So each of these you can modify in those ways. So that's one tip. The other tip is being specific, descriptive, and as detailed as possible about the desired context, outcome, length, and format and style. Articulate the desired output format through examples. I think always start, zero shot prompting and then few shot, and if neither of them work, then fine tune. So just start from the basics and consider how much are you demanding from the AI. If you demand a lot, you have to give it a lot. If it's not a lot, you can invest a short amount of time into it. And instead of just saying what not to do, say what it could do instead. Give the prescriptive advice as to what it can do. And when in doubt, always ask the AI to help you write a prompt. Hopefully you've seen this throughout this workshop where I've asked AI how to write the prompt effectively, and it's just helped me in that way. So you can always just ask AI as a tool to help you in that journey. Excellent. That is everything in terms of tips. I'm going to stop the recording there, and then we'll come back into the last section. I want to break it up, which are the key take-home messages. So we'll leave it there, and I'll come back in a moment. I'll see you very, very soon.